All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Digging Deeper Podcast. Pete here with Anthony and a very special brand new guest.
First time guest.
Andrea Philips, whose official title at Rise City Church is
Everyone's
Executive
boss.
Administrator of
take
Human
that.
Resources and Financial
Administration.
Fiefdom.
I wish I had a fiefdom. That would be amazing.
But Andrea, you are essentially, I think executive admin is probably the shorthand, but overseeing all the HR processes, overseeing all our finances, all that kind of stuff, a lot of the back end stuff. And you're also part of what's been a really intense kind of hiring process, obviously, both as HR, but as part of the team. So might touch on a little bit, but first time on the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
You guys know Anthony. He ran last week.
Hey.
So let's do this. Let's just start. So maybe give us like I don't know, just a quick who are you? Like what brought you to Rise? How long you been here? Backstory a little bit.
So we have been here about 8 years. It'll be 8 years in August. And we first started coming here because we were actually living overseas and found out we were coming to San Diego, which was not on our radar at all.
Being your husband, Ryan.
Yes, and our kids.
Ryan's military.
He is in the military, which is why we were overseas.
3 kids, all in youth ministry as
3.
well.
That's right. And we're very thankful for you. So we were living overseas, found out we were moving to San Diego, and we had other military friends who were already here messaging back and forth saying like, oh, hey, we're moving to San Diego. That's so great. Would love any recommendations about like where to live, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, oh, we actually recently started going to Rise, so you should come check it out. So the very first Sunday that we were not completely jet lagged, we showed up at Rise, and it was really sweet to have that immediate connection because her oldest was in the nursery with our kids like years and years and years ago when they were itty bitty. We've been here ever since. So there's.
Cool. So was that pre-building, or is 8 years ago when we were here at the building?
I think our first Sunday here was only like the 3rd or 4th Sunday. So we
That's
were
crazy.
here for most of the renovation, the gigantic porta potties outside
Love it.
phase, which was super fun.
Oh yeah.
I forgot about that.
So when
How could you forget about porta potties outside
you,
of church?
you blocked it out because it was so amazing.
It was a whirlwind season. And then you came on staff originally kind of just helping like communication kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
And
I was doing e-news, websites.
When was that?
stuff.
How long ago was that?
That was 2019.
I think right about the same time, didn't we?
Yeah,
sort of start
I
around the
think
same
so.
time?
Oh,
Yeah.
And then when Lori Suchi, who was in your position, retired, that was 2 years ago now? 3 years?
It's all a
3.
blur. I don't even.
It was right before I started
And it was
because I
kind of
remember
slow growth.
transitioning into
So
HR.
that was 22
months,
then.
Yeah.
That's
I was
You've
gonna
been in
say
this role for a couple of years at least.
Yeah.
because I remember you
About to.
walking me through, and had a bunch of questions for you, and you were like, "I'm still learning some of this," and I remember I was like, "Oh yes, I need you to know it because I won't know it if you don't." I'm like,
Yeah, so this Sunday we finished off the Calibrate series, but we also had men's retreat.
oh yeah,
You got a chance to speak at Anthony, and it was a really good weekend. Brandon was back for it. We also had another elder update regarding the search, so kind of a lot going on. Let's start with men's retreat. So, how was it for you, Anthony? I can't really ask you,
yeah.
but did you hear any feedback?
I can tell you what my husband said.
Your husband has insight.
He
Yeah.
thought it was great.
I thought it was great too. I mean, I brought the cup to represent and everything. I think it's always, I don't know, like I feel like I look at it from and experience it even through like multiple perspectives, if that makes sense. Like I see it as like Anthony the person and like my own individual believer in God, like how am I connecting with people? And then I see it as Anthony the pastor, like now I'm having more peer-to-peer encounters with parents of students that, normally are limited to like a 2-minute conversation. And now we're, face-to-face in the depths of the cornhole tournament and stuff like that. And they've become my enemies. I'm just kidding. But I think, I don't know. And then the other perspective is like, we did something interesting this year that I think to me made men's retreat even better. And I think opens up more possibilities, but we let seniors go. And we did that very intentionally. Like Jim and I were talking about just ways we can continue to help integrate kind of seniors into kind of the rest of the congregation. That way, when they graduate, they're not just limited to like a young adult group or something like that. They can begin to build those relationships with other people too. And I thought for me, that was probably the the coolest thing I saw, even though overall it was just a blast. Like from the tournaments to the services, I felt like every single message kind of hit home and again in multiple ways. But seeing the seniors interact like on the first day where they were kind of like glued to my hip, like you're the only guy I know really, to then like I could barely get a minute with them because they're talking to all these new guys they've connected with. And then seeing them Sunday post men's retreat and they're like walking through and now it's like, again, I barely see them because they're talking to this guy and that guy and they're talking about this moment that happened and that message. And it was just like, felt like like there was just so much unity involved. Like it was exciting to get back and see it immediately play out again in services.
I never thought of the dynamic of like when you go to men's retreat, you're hanging out with a lot of men whose children or youth are into your ministry.
Oh yeah.
Like I was in youth ministry for a while, but I don't know, like it was a while ago, but I never really, in that season of my life, I didn't engage a ton with other aspects of the life of our church.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever went to a men's retreat
Mm-hmm.
when I was a youth pastor, like back in Illinois. But like to hang out with you, like, so how am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, this is weird.
Does your kid hate me? I don't know.
Well, you know what's interesting about it though is like I think it's actually what you said is true. Like it's easy to be just in the youth bubble and the youth bubble alone. And so I think for me, I try to be super intentional with going to these events and stuff, even if I might be tired or like, honestly, even with this, it's like, well, everyone else is going to be gone, which means like that could be a real good weekend for me to just chill. But it's like, I think it's important to be part of it too. And then, like I said, since I experienced it from multiple perspectives, there's a big part of like Anthony that's like, man, it feels good to not run a service and not have to worry about preaching every single session or anything like that. Like I can just stand and worship and I can just sit and listen to the message and like allow it to impact me and not just go like, how do I take this and make it youth? Or how do I, I don't know. I think it's just as it's intentional that I go there. I think it's also probably healthy that I remove myself from the youth bubble to do things like that.
Yeah. I think in retrospect, I wish I'd done that more. It would have made me a better youth pastor because I would have understood
so true.
parents better. I didn't really understand.
Yeah. And honestly, like the flip side of that coin too, is it actually gives you so much insight to students. Cause like there's some kids that you're like, like this is just really like a random example, but like, for example, there might be a kid who's kind of quiet and then you meet their mom and you encounter their mom a lot and their mom's mega extroverted and like high energy. And then it can make you go like, why is he so quiet though? And then you meet their dad and sometimes you're like, oh, I get it. Like, that's just how the dad is, like just super laid back, calm, like fun and has high energy, but maybe isn't as expressive. And so the same way it like helps me understand parents more, it also helps me understand students more. So I feel like for me, I'm like, overall, it's like I'm still like being a youth pastor and connecting intentionally there, but then it's also like, I don't know, it just kind of hits every bird with one stone.
So Andrea, you have a different dynamic because, well, I like in the sense of you're on staff, but and it's not a hierarchy by any means. It's just a difference. Like whereas Anthony, what we pay Anthony to do is more the direct, what you traditionally call like pastoral care kind of work. What we pay you to do is much more administrative work, but you're still a member of the staff. So like for you, when you go to like women's events and retreats and things, you're sort of a staff member. But I mean, like, I guess what's that like for you representing the staff, but also sort of not necessarily staying there as like a pastor or something? That's
a good question.
So I feel like even though I am not a pastoral staff, I feel like because I am still on staff, I still get looked to a lot as like somebody who can be trusted, right? Like somebody who people can go to, somebody who
That's great.
can pray with other people. And so retreats for me, especially the past couple of years, have really been more like I'm not going to like spend a lot of time with my friends. It's definitely more ministry for me. And, every single year, again, the past couple of years, there have been people who have, pulled me aside and there's been lots of prayer and lots of talking through things and helping, trying to help people. So
yeah. Oh, that's cool. I see that too. And I was at women's retreat actually.
No.
It was funny because for like tech and worship and stuff. But
I wonder, like, do you guys feel like I feel like once you're on staff, obviously, I feel like you always represent staff. But truthfully, I feel like the influence that comes with just being on staff, it has no off switch. Like, do you guys feel that way? Like, even at events where I'm not running it, there's some sort of responsibility I like take on. You know what I mean? Like,
I feel like especially as an admin person who,
yeah, that's true.
You
From
know,
your
like
side,
I
for
help
sure.
run the Mexico trips, and so people are always like, "Oh, what do I do about this? Where do I need to be? How much is this?"
Yeah.
So I feel like I always get asked a lot of admin questions, and that just kind of flows into everything. Like, I'll go to a women's event sometimes, and somebody will be like, "Oh, you work at Rise, you know who people are. What about this?" And half the time I'm like, I can't answer. I don't know the answer to that. Like, I'm just here as an attender, but I get asked
I
questions.
spiraled a lot of thoughts in my head for some reason. Now I want to write that down. Influence has no off switch. I got my message for Wednesday.
There you go.
Yeah, 48 hours to get it ready. Go.
You'd be
That's
shocked.
good. I guess so. Like, in terms of like other ways that we're involved. So Andrea, like going back to, so Sunday we had an update where we're in the process. We didn't offer like a ton of specifics in terms of like, you know, who the candidates are moving forward with, but we did talk a little bit about the process. And you're part of the process on two fronts, because anything we do, obviously we're going to hiring has to run through human resources, HR, but also we put together a committee, a team of people, to do like secondary interviews, and you're on that team. And not as the HR person, but just as a staff member that we trust and want your opinion. You know, we're not wanting to get on here and like divulge super secret, whatever. They're not the secret stuff, but just how has that experience been for you? What's it been like? What might people be interested to know about what we've been doing? Anything like that?
So this is my first time working for a church, and definitely the first time being involved in the behind the scenes process. But I also grew up in church, so I've seen, you know, the new lead pastor
From the
process
outside.
from the opposite side lots and lots of
interesting.
times. And I had no idea how much potentially could go into it, and how much time and how much effort could just go into the hiring process for a new lead pastor. For me, it's really felt weighty. Just wanting, even though the interview committee doesn't decide who the next lead pastor is, just that sense of responsibility of, we're taking this seriously and want to do the due diligence of, Slingshot did so much to get us the top 5, but then of those top 5, like, is this the right person for Rise? And like, what's the best fit for where we are as a church, as a staff?
Yeah. Where we're going and everything.
Yeah, exactly. You know, looking ahead to, ideally the next lead pastor would be here for years and years and years. So is it somebody who can lead us not just for the next year, but for the next 5 years or the next 10 years? So yeah, really just feeling the weight of that, and have put so much prayer into it. Both me and my husband, obviously, he's been kind of looped in on what's going on a little bit. And just praying through that together.
So having been on the other end of it a number of times, which I relate that too, I have as
Same.
well.
Yeah.
Something that has sort of guided me is that very concept of like, I've been on the other side of this, and I know, like, the rational part of my brain is like, okay, I know you can't tell me everything, and I respect that, but at the same time, I still feel like there are things I should be hearing about. And so I've been, from my side of this whole thing, I've been trying to sift through that lens of like, if I were going to the church, I would at least want to hear these kind of things. Like, from the last month and a half, are there things that you've like learned that you would sort of like tell your former self about what you now know, kind of about other specific things about it?
I don't know how to answer that.
Well, and I just mean like, you know, like, here's things you never would have thought about. They're going on behind the scenes that you couldn't like.
Yeah, now you're experiencing.
Now
Like,
that
whoa.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but even thinking about what are we looking for in the
that's a
next
big
lead
one.
pastor,
Yeah, let's see.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember when I was 16 and going through this, and a church are just like, oh, you want somebody who's a good preacher. The end.
Yeah.
But then you get a different perspective, and
From
there
the inside,
are
you're like,
yeah
it's
there
more than
are
just
so
preaching.
there are so many things that go on behind the scenes. Like I probably was one of those people when I was younger who's like, what does a pastor do all week? I don't know. They just like prepare their message and they pray and that's it.
I still have students that I'm like, yeah, today at lunch we went, and they're like, you work here? I was like, what?
What do you think I
I
do? So yeah, just that piece of it, being aware of all the many
that's so
different, levels that go into what you're looking for in a lead pastor and how long the process takes. Like I didn't know when I signed up to be on the interview committee or was voluntold. I don't know. Did not realize how many hours I was going to spend researching people, how many hours it was going to be on the interviews, like just all the time that goes into it. It's not a flip decision, just like, oh, we're going to pick the one we like the best. Oh, it's you. Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Like, just a much longer.
They had it
process.
easier in the Old Testament when they would just pull out the human and the Thurman, and they would just pick a rock, like, oh, you're the king.
I'm the king now. I'm the captain now.
No.
They also had it easier in the United Methodist Church that I grew up in when they were like, we're going to move people around. You're going here. You're going here at the end.
Somebody made a comment about that yesterday, and they were joking, but I think he said, well, the when the Pope dies, they can pick a new Pope in like 3 days. Why are you guys taking 2 months? And
they also sequester themselves for like 7.
Well,
like,
he was completely joking. It was a joke.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, actually, I know you're joking with me, but there's a real issue there, which is every style of what you'd call like a governance structure has strengths and weaknesses. And I don't particularly want to work in a very hierarchical, heavily structured thing like the Catholic Church or the United Methodist Church. But the advantage of those hierarchical structures is in these kind of situations, you have all these layers of leadership and pipelines and things.
That's true.
They quickly move things in and out. For us, we're completely independent. So hiring a new pastor is just throwing out a huge net and saying, who's interested? And then how do I find out who you are? So all the bishops or cardinals, I don't know, who would be interested, all the cardinals who would be interested in becoming Pope are not strangers that have to be vetted. They're people that it's like, well, we know these seven guys. Like this is most of the candidates that came in are people that we would have to completely vet.
But the flip side of that is, again, growing up in the United Methodist Church, there was somebody, so many levels above saying, okay, well, this is going to be the new pastor for this small town in the middle of Kentucky. And sometimes it was okay. And sometimes it was a disaster. Because they were just
There's no process. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there was a process, but it wasn't taking into account what does the church need? Like, what is the kind of person who wants to live in a small town, who can lead and guide these people at this church?
And I would say it's probably, for me, in my experience, like I've been through a lot of these transitions too, and I don't think it's necessarily related to just being Assemblies of God, but every transition I've been a part of is basically from founding pastor or lead pastor to their son. Which I think begs the question: why isn't Shepherd Grant our next lead pastor? Why aren't we talking about this more? He stays, Brandon goes. Every weekend's a party.
Yeah, that's actually, I've had really good conversations with that about people in the past, because the thing is with a hierarchical structure, like when I say hierarchical, I mean like all the churches are connected and they have bishops over them or superintendents.
Yeah, very much a pipeline.
Like a triangle.
Yeah.
And in the United Methodist Church, going all the way back to Francis Asbury, you have this idea of like, how do I reach all these tiny little communities all throughout the scattered western frontier? And it was, well, hire a guy who will buy a horse and just ride from place to place to place. So that's why Methodism is so strong in the Midwest, because these itinerant preachers were people that never stayed anywhere. They kept moving.
Dang.
And now 150 years later, the Methodist Church still does that. Like they still keep moving the pastors around and around. A lot of their motivation for it now is just trying to keep new blood and not getting stale. But I worked for a UMC church in Kansas, and we were far and away the biggest, healthiest Methodist church within probably 300 miles. And so the bishop over that conference was constantly wanting to move our pastor to help him go fix other churches. And he'd be like, nope, and they couldn't really do anything because they knew that he was like, what are you going to do? You can't, he was sort of like the black sheep of the conference. And then the UMC just, obviously the United Methodist Church had a very, very difficult last 5 years, split in half. And, it's a lot. But again, you see with the hierarchy issues, if another church decides that they want to move in a certain theological direction or make a certain hiring decision or whatever, like for Rise City, we're like, oh, okay, you do you kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you're a Methodist, you're like, well, wait, we all have to follow you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to do what you're told. So there's strengths and weaknesses, but like what you don't see very often, and it was in my congregation. So our lead pastor's son was a little bit younger than me, but wanted to be a pastor, do the whole 9 yards. And he, it's like, well, you can take over for your dad. It's like, well, this is a Methodist church. It doesn't work that way. You have to go get ordained by the Methodists. And then they have to appoint you basically. So we like started a separate campus and became a campus pastor.
Yeah.
And then when his dad retired, rather than all the other stuff was going on, their campus actually just broke off and became their own church and left the Methodists. So that stuff
I've seen that
all
a
the
few
time.
times too, actually. I feel like
And they're still
breakouts.
going. They're still a church. But the thing with fathers and sons, though, is a church like ours is much more common. Because if you think about even the way that we started with an entrepreneur, right? A person who moved out here and just started something.
Yeah.
And even though Brandon doesn't own anything here, there's still this sense of like, well, he came and started it. He built it kind of thing.
His presence is heavily
It almost
felt.
feels like a small business.
Yeah.
And in America, you turn over your small businesses to your children.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, also when you think about like, even just someone that's qualified, I think he didn't make it up, but Malcolm Gladwell, was really famous for putting forward the 10,000 hour rule. Like to become an expert in something, you need to 10,000 hours. It's very hard to get 10,000 hours in something. Well, if your dad is a pastor and you've been coming to church every day since you're 4 and you're preaching in 3rd grade and then you're preaching to your middle school friends, then you're preaching in high school, like by the time you're in college, you're already so much more experienced.
That's so true.
Than many other people. And so you actually are kind of a natural option to be like, hey, by the time you're 30, you're way ahead of somebody that got saved 5 years ago.
That's so great. I never thought of that.
The flip side though is oftentimes, and this is the danger for every, well, I was going to say Joel Osteen, but he gets mixed reviews. But Joel Osteen was a very successful. Andy Stanley was a pastor's son. You have a lot of people who
that's so true.
Got the hours in, but never had the same heart and passion for Jesus. And they take over a church and they're missing what their father had because their father did it because of a genuine love. Yeah. And that's,
some people do it as
really
obligation.
hard. It's really hard. I've seen it work and I've seen it fail.
Yeah. I've seen both sides. And I think what's been surprising to me throughout this process is the difficulties that come with it being a good exit. Meaning it's almost harder at times for me to be like, we are moving forward and I trust and believe God and feel God in that. But also it's like, Brandon didn't do anything wrong. Like this would be easier if I had a reason to be like angry at him and blame him and like point a finger. But I'm just like, God, like I feel you in this. And that to me has been what surprising, like just how good of a transition it is and the difficulties that has brought that I maybe haven't experienced before because I haven't necessarily had to go from great pastor to how do we replace great with great? Normally it's like, well, we had no choice but to replace.
You got fired.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting to see what comes up with that.
Yeah. Well, this week we got into not the last church in Revelation. We actually did kind of a switch, but the last of the series we talked about the Church of Sardis, and it was, I don't know, it wasn't like probably of the different churches I'd gotten into, it was probably the least what we would a word in biblical studies terms is exegetical, where you're like pulling out of the text and really diving into the word. I didn't do any of that really. Jesus. There were no Greek words in the entire message. It was really something more that I was, kind of leading up to an idea that I had that I wanted to share with the church, of just this sort of idea of like, what does it mean to be open to the future? And so it's kind of a right turn a little bit, but I told you before we started, I was actually thinking like about, part of my message was just being silly, but thinking about ways that it can be hard to let go of things in your past and
definitely
embrace the future. And, you know, when you had said earlier, Anthony, we were talking about like coming to understand parents.
Yeah.
That was my biggest mistake as a youth pastor, is having no understanding of what it was like to be a parent. Like, and I would even just being young with church, I had no understanding of how people in their 40s and 50s understood things. And I thought they were all stupid. Like they're all stuck in their ways and we need to blow all this up, you know?
Yeah.
And I wanted to fight everything. I wanted
No,
to
not
change
now.
everything. All your music is terrible.
I have felt that, but not now.
And so I don't know. It's just now I'm 45 and I'm like, oh, that's
get
what it
it.
means to care about more tradition in the past. And
I feel it.
My kids played in those rooms you're wanting to redecorate. And I first felt the Holy Spirit singing that song that you just said was really old and stupid, you know? And I just made it come to you, like Andrea, your son is about to go to college.
He is. The countdown is on.
Where I don't know, because my oldest is 14, but I can imagine
That's coming soon though.
The tension of the past and the future is like boom right there. Like, how are you processing that?
I feel
Are you processing that?
Ask me. So he's supposed to go, I think his orientation is August 17th. So
he's going to Asbury.
And he's going to Asbury, where my husband and I both went to college.
And I went to seminary.
And with the statue of John Wesley and Francis Asbury right there in Wilmore. But the word that keeps coming to my mind is bittersweet. Just in thinking, you know, it really feels like yesterday that he was a little baby and could just fit right here. And, you know, was learning to walk and his first day of school and all of these things that have led us to this point, and thinking, but that was the past. And you can't, I wouldn't want him to stay here and live at home and not get a job and not go to college, because that's not moving forward. And so for him to continue to grow into the man that God wants him to be, for him to become the person God has always intended him to be, he has to move out and go forward. And that's just bittersweet. Like even a couple of weekends ago, we've been planning his graduation party, and, you know, we're going to have pictures of him throughout the years, and like looking through all of these old pictures that, again, it seemed like yesterday, but also when you're in those moments, when you have toddlers, preschoolers, you're like, it's
when will they grow up?
You like, you mentally know it's not always going to be like this, but also when you've argued with them about going to bed and what to eat and et cetera, you're like, I know this is going to end someday, but I don't see it right now. And now looking at him and just thinking, like, you are an adult. You could go die for our country. You will vote in the next presidential election. Like, those are weighty things.
Dang, that's
just
crazy
to think about. So yeah, bittersweet's the best word, I think.
That's a good word. Were you, personal question. I feel like I know the answers, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Great.
Like, I don't personally see you as a helicopter mom, or do I just not see that side of you anyway? But I understand helicopter moms. I get it. I just...
So to give you a very real answer, I would say that's been a process for me. Like when the kids were much younger, it was easy to do that. Ryan was also gone a lot. He was like even deployed when our youngest was born. And so when the kids were young, I had to do everything. And I also tend to a little more type A, so like to control everything, which worked really well with toddlers. No, not so much.
Well with teenagers.
No, it did not work well with toddlers. But yeah, I just felt like I was more that when the kids were younger, but just throughout the years, God has been working on really my heart, reminding me like, I love your kids more than you ever will. Like, I made them. I'm the one who decided like
really good.
the world needed a Grayson and a Jack and a Nicholas. And there is a part of me and them, and I have plans for them. And so you have to trust me, and you have to trust that I have good things for them, and I have beautiful things for them. And you can't hold on so tight trying to control what those things are.
So do you feel like that's just a trial and error thing that you learn over time then? Like
To not be a helicopter parent?
well, yeah, because honestly, I used to feel heavily like my mom was a helicopter parent and my mom's military. I would never do that. I think freedom's the best way. And like now, I mean, I don't have kids of my own, but even just seeing my 5 and 7-year-old nephew and being around them, I'm like, no, I feel very strongly like I could be a helicopter dad and I wouldn't even think twice. Like I want to be like, I just want to protect him.
And I think there's a part of that when you become a parent, there's like this fear that is really easy to give into too much of what's going to happen. Like even I've told lots of people this, my older kids learning to drive, like top 5 most terrifying things I have ever experienced as a parent. Cause you're like, oh, here, just take the keys and just go drive and it'll be fine, I guess. I don't know.
See you when you get back?
So,
Question mark.
The upside now is we have, like the Find My Family, so I can literally track exactly where they
on your
are,
phone.
which my parents did not have when I was growing up.
Hey, that's interesting.
But yeah, I think it's easy to lead into that fear in a way that I could not have understood before I was a parent.
So the more
But
often
also-
you let go, the easier it is to kind of trust that. Or is it always the same level of difficulty to like not micromanage and not?
Somewhere in between, I would say. I think because God has been so faithful to lead my kids through so many things and through so many things that have been hard. I mean, this actually kind of goes back to the message. I can say God has been faithful in the past.
I have no reason not to trust him.
Yeah, like even though this is hard and even though, I don't know what going off to college on halfway across the United States is going to be, God's been so faithful. Like I can trust, I can push through my fear and realize that fear isn't from him.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there that just parallels what we were kind of talking about because, I'm not, one thing, I'm in this temporary short season, but it's like, even though it's temporary and in the grand scheme of things, I know it's short, it's like I adopted all of the fear that you could have about being in charge of the church.
It sounds so incredibly healthy.
Yeah, but like when
And
the
not at
fear
all
in the sense of
exhausting.
when you say like this, ultimately you're okay. So you are a parent, and like it's like you worry about your child making good decisions and being healthy and all that kind of things go with it. So like I don't have long-term fear because I know someone else is going to take this job. I'm going to have fun. But I understand the fear more now. I think I understand more why lead pastors sometimes could act the way they act, because there's this like, I have to control this.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of this. But I also think like that wasn't so much necessarily what was in the back of my head when I was preaching yesterday. I think the thing that I really understand that. I understand safety and fear of like things like that. What I think I struggle with parents is when I just loved having little kids so much. They were so cute. They were cuddly, little baby names. Like you've got to be able to let go of that past or you're really damaging your children.
And
I
you
think
get into
like
like codependency.
yeah,
and, like,
especially
all kinds of
when
unhealthy
you
stuff.
have, I saw a study that very, very controversial. I'll put that out there first. Nothing proven, but but it was like, and it showed like how a very, I'm going to be cautious how I say this. It showed a statistically real correlation between mothers who felt that their son was their only source of friendship and relationship and homosexuality. And I know that's a very, I'm not standing here defending that study or anything.
No,
I'm
but
just
it's
saying
I've seen that
interesting.
before.
there is, and I have a friend who actually you guys met him. He came last year, Christopher. He would tell you that when he was young, like his father didn't give his mom a lot of attention, and like he was his mom's best friend. She'd take him shopping. She'd buy him, like everything was like, and it was like she could never quite let go of that. And by the time he got into high school, it really started to like affect him immensely. And I think like this idea of being able to say like, look, that was the past. That was a great season, but everything changes and we all have to change. And as we change and we grow and our kids get older and our church grows, we have to be ready for new seasons and new things. So we don't stunt our growth or just get stuck and kind of never become what we're actually meant to become. And I can say all that really easily because my kids aren't there yet. I still have them at
Okay,
home.
but 14 feels close, right?
Yeah,
like
but
with Kira, you're like,
come talk to me in 4 years.
Kira's the least fearful.
Kira's older
I-
than me, though.
I can't-
I think
I can't-
Kira's older than me at this
I'd probably
point.
give
Like,
I'd give
more
Kira
mature.
the keys right now. Like, hey, go to the store and get me something.
She might get pulled over, but
she might come back and own the store. I feel like she'll be, Dad, I bought the property.
Actually, my daughter Kira would come home and she'd come into my house and she'd go, Dad, I need to tell you something. When I was going down the road, I crossed 30 miles per hour. And I'm sorry.
Here's the keys. I already put the
I'll
keys
never
in the
drive
safe.
again.
I changed the code. I won't drive
I'll
again.
go up to my room and punish myself now. Like, who are you? What is this?
I won't read tonight.
I don't
She's
understand.
No, but that's so true. And
Yeah.
I love even when you were talking through the verse in Isaiah, we actually opened our year. That's our verse for the year for the youth ministry.
Oh, cool.
Which was, I think, not ironic in any way, but crazy that was the verse we as a team felt was like we wanted to represent the youth ministry going into this year. And then it was followed by Brandon announcing he's leaving, a lead pastor search,
Yeah.
all these other things. And a big part that we focus on is like, see, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? And so many times I think with parenting, with leading, whether it's a church or your kids, like we have to come to terms with the fact that while seasons change, like you said, seasons come to an end, there's still a sense of like familiarity in that, but it's gonna be different.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the controlling aspect comes in of like, but I don't want it to be different. Like I want to hold on and protect these things because my fear is it can't get better than it is, you know?
So kind of to go along with that, when I was in high school many, many, many years ago, my senior year, that was actually the verse that we picked.
Dang.
Like the youth leaders picked. And I knew that was a verse that you all had picked. And so it's been interesting for me to kind of think
See
about
Grayson.
this year. Like there's this verse that meant so much to me when I was 17, 18 years old. And what that meant to me as, someone who basically had their whole future ahead of them and what that means now, and saying, I'm glad that I'm not the same at 46 as I was at 18. And that is true, like personally. And also I want that to be true for our church, right? Like I want to remember those good things, but there is always that moving forward, having people being a church who is more loving, who is more life-giving, who is more who God has created the church to be. So that's been
And I think
interesting for me to
even
think through
just
this
on
year.
the topic of like how we perceive it, I think I take it as a big call to like more intimacy with God. Like the more we know God, the more we'll be able to perceive what's going on. And I think that when the fear of all the change happening is, causing so much chaos within our emotions and our minds that at times we drift away from God, which ultimately makes it harder to perceive what's happening. But I just think it's such a unique time. And like, while I know there's a lot of emotion involved for everyone, like I'm still excited. Like I'm very excited about all of it. And I'm aware of the emotions and I feel it all. And I think realistically, like Brandon still being around has made it, pretty easy. But then I also
through
know
all the emotions or
I'm
stages
like,
of grief
like I feel
yet.
like I haven't, I can't start my grieving until he's gone. So I'm like, that's getting closer. Like, it's like, I probably feel the same way about that as you feel of like college is getting closer for Grayson. And I'm like,
Ask me when he leaves.
the cornfields are
I was
getting
gonna-
closer for Brandon.
There's
Like, not for Grayson.
I thought you were saying there are cornfields in Kentucky. And something like
No, for Illinois, normal Illinois.
Horse farms, though.
Horse
there are
farms.
lots and tobacco farms.
Yeehaw. Oh, there
They're
you
very
go.
different horse farms, though. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not like making a better bore statement, but horse farms out here feel a bit more country western. Horse farms in Kentucky are like
They're
these like beautiful.
they're like lush
white
and
picket
green.
Fences.
I've never
Yes.
been. I drove through Kentucky once, but I've never actually been.
Well, there's different parts of it. The parts of like where the school is, like the horse farms are just beautiful.
So would you call it country? Like where it's at? It's like a country area, or
So,
It's not farm country. It's a different kind of country.
okay?
and yet
It's just
the
small
town
town.
next to the town that I grew up in is called Nicholasville and reminds me exactly of Lakeside. So
Yeah, there's different parts of it. It's
Yeah.
not. I mean, there are definitely parts of Kentucky that are Kentucky.
Yeah. I was
that
gonna say
are
the Kentucky I think I
Kentucky.
know is probably not real to what it is.
It's not real.
Yeah, it's there's parts. Everywhere I've lived, I've been in 7 states. Everywhere has its own kind of beauty and goodness. And
That's so true.
Kentucky is also very humid and
It is
yeah.
grossly humid.
But I just like good places. But Asbury's a great school. Even just in the last couple of years, it's had such cool things happening there.
It has the revival.
I know. I'm excited for
Asbury
them too.
Revival.
Well, guys, thanks so much for being able to do this today. Appreciate it, Andrew. Great having you
course.
on.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. You did great.
Yeah, we'll. So this Sunday is Mariah's second time on the stage. She's gonna be preaching. We also have our baby dedications happening. So
Lots of
it'll be
babies.
Brandon's kind of last day on the stage too here at Rise, at least in a formal capacity.
Oh yeah, next week's
Yeah, we'll definitely be
one meal already, huh?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
2
Is
weeks.
1 meal. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
But Brandon will
They're
be
going away.
back. We'll use preaching as an excuse to have him come back and visit. So,
Oh, he'll use it as an excuse to come back and visit.
well, my kids will need it too. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. So next Monday, Ryan will probably be on here. We can grill her on all of her mistakes and wonderful preaching. But in the meantime, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Cue the music.